All right, so today we're going to have a conversation around the topic of immigration.
The USCCB put out a document years back basically on the 5 principles of immigration.
But also to be a part of the culture into which they're immigrating, not to sacrifice and completely forget their own culture.
You have 2 goods, which is compassion for the person in need versus also, though, we're not called to be irresponsible in terms of creating a system which is unviable.
The conversation in America right now is not so much around those who have come into the country legally, who have followed through these processes, taken their time, done it well. It's around those who didn't, but they're here now. How do we as Catholics start to process our current reality with illegal immigration in America?
As we start today's show, crazy stat, 90% of you who watch our content here at St. Dominic Media have not yet subscribed. So it's free, it helps us out. It's like donating without having to give any money. It takes 1 second. So I ask you to please subscribe today. It helps us to get the show out to more people and to support the good work that's happening here. So thanks so much for subscribing and check out this next episode.
All right, so today we're going to have a conversation around the topic of immigration.
Oh, good. I thought we were going to be controversial today.
Yeah. No, we're going to keep it real light. I think this is one of the perfect examples of the Catholic both and, because oftentimes when I'm hearing conversations, debate, political discourse around immigration, I'm hearing a conversation from the right that says this is the way, and a conversation from the left that says no, this is the way, and there seems to be nothing in the middle. But the Catholic Church always comes in with something of the both and. So maybe to frame this conversation, I'd be interested to hear what is, and not shortchanging, strong manning the argument, what's the basic point on these two sides, and what does the church have to say where maybe we can start finding that both and? So Father Tom, would you kick us off here?
Yeah, sure. So very simply and quickly, the USCCB put out a document years back basically on the 5 principles of immigration, and how you could have actually good laws that have immigration. The first principle simply is that people have a right to live. And what they need to live is basically food, water, shelter, right? So people have a right to the basic necessities of life. Doesn't include healthcare, doesn't include all the other stuff. But they have a right for themselves as well as for their families to live. And that's a universal human right.
And safety is kind of attached to that. You have to be safe within that. Can't be constantly challenged. Your water access can't be constantly.
Yeah, so clean water, clean food, clean air, safety, and housing. Those are what all human beings across the board, regardless of the color of your skin or your ethnicity and where you come from, those are what we need. So if you can't get that, that's first principle, universal rights to life and subsistence of life. Second principle is that if you cannot find that where you are currently, the earth given to humanity as a whole, to Adam and Eve and to all their descendants, that we hold the earth in common, and therefore people have a right, if they can't find that in their particular area, that they have a right to migrate and to find it in a place where they can so that they may live. That's the second right. So people have a natural right to migrate, which then has to be balanced by the third principle, which is that for universal and for world peace, nations have a right to order and to basically manage their borders, because it stops conflicts from happening. So World War II was when you had the Germans cross the border, obviously into France and to other areas. If you don't have strong borders, that on a global international level, this could lead to violations of borders, and it can lead to war, and then the war destabilizes everything. So you have the natural good of states to protect and to order their borders, and therefore, insofar as you can, you ought to, it's not a universal imperative, you ought to respect the borders of nations because they have a legitimate right to order their borders. But the first principles are the first principles because the border control is borders are not natural, universal rights to all things because they're social constructs. But they're good, strong constructs, and for social order, you must have borders. But the right to life is a universal right, which is, to a certain extent, you can't have countries if you don't have people who are alive and have their rights respected. So, therefore, that's the third right, is that you have borders, the borders are good, borders should and ought to be controlled by nations, and that they have a legitimate interest in establishing borders and protecting their borders, especially from assault as well as from disease and things like that. And so like what we saw with COVID, like that's one of the reasons why you want borders. The fourth principle is that people who are under threat, so persecution, people who are under threat of war, people who are fleeing and are refugees should be put to the top of the list. That people who are refugee status and people who cannot find those, that if you have people who have basically looking for a better life versus you have actually people who cannot live, basically the fourth principle is that refugees should be given priority in the pecking order. I'm simplifying.
Entrance into a country.
Simplifying. I'm obviously simplifying the principles. And the fifth principle is that people who are looking for a better life, right, have a right to migrate, but that they should follow the rights of the land, and therefore you have to balance people who are seeking a better life versus the nation. But when you have a question between a person who's an immigrant who's just looking for a better life versus a person who's a refugee seeking shelter, that's basically the fourth and the fifth. So, but the fifth one is that the people who are just looking for a better life, you cannot, even if they violate the laws of the state, you cannot violate their basic right to their life and their integrity, which includes the cohesion of their family. So like you can't just separate fathers from mothers and spouses from each other just because they violated a border. That their family, the family cohesion, family life is more important than borders. That makes sense, because that's a natural right. So therefore, just because a person might violate the nation's border, that doesn't give the nation the legitimacy to treat them however they want. They still have to be accorded basic human rights. So those are the 5 principles.
So with those 5 principles also comes kind of like things that flow from that. One of them being, and this is interesting, then Cardinal Ratzinger, eventually was Pope Benedict XVI, talked about what are the obligations of those who do immigrate, those who go to another country, that they also have the responsibility. It's not, all those rights are theirs, but it's also the response, because rights always come with responsibilities. What's the responsibility of the nation? To respect human dignity, to try to build up a flourishing society where
obey
you don't
the
have
laws
to.
of the land.
Yes, so they are obligated to obey the laws of the land, but also to be a part of the culture into which they're immigrating. Not to sacrifice and completely forget their own culture, but in a sense, if I'm moving to China and I'm for whatever reason I'm like, there's something about that move that should animate within me. What are my responsibilities there? Or as much as possible, I'm never going to escape the fact that I was born in America, but as much as possible to learn the language, to learn the culture, to make sure that my own sensibilities and culture aren't being something that's a source of scandal or tearing down the ones around. All those things are
and to promote the national values.
Yeah, yeah. So in a sense, I think that's one of those things that gets lost. That the church maintains holds those 5 points and the values that flow from them as well, which are in tension. And I think it's important for us to recognize that those things are in tension with each other. But welcome to this is where decisions get made and conversations need to happen.
Yeah. So in America, there's obviously a huge conversation, a lot happening at this moment in our country. Maybe as y'all are talking with people, encountering people, I'm sure you're encountering people who have very different opinions on what's going on in America right now, that are Catholic and faithful Catholics. Yeah. Where do y'all see there's a unity in those 5, even while there's like something of a interesting interplay there? Where do you see maybe that unity in the church's teaching? Like, where do people get caught up in a lane where that unity is disrupted? Like, what are y'all hearing out there?
As soon as, really, because we're talking about ideas right now that should animate, principles and decisions and laws. All those are impacted by kind of, the cultural zeitgeist that we're in, the times that we're in. But all those affect people. And for me, as soon as we start to forget that there are people involved here, then that to me is hugely problematic. I remember years ago, recognizing I've got people that are definitely way on both sides of this, who are all members of my, not both, it's just 2 people, no, who are all members of my parish who I love dearly. And I remember people who were very much arguing for the we could say pro-border enforcement, pro getting anyone who's not here legally out out of the country as soon as possible. Like being able to pose to them the question now, because I think this is part of the humanizing of this. If you were in a situation where your family was struggling to eat, where there was struggles with, there was constant insecurity, and your cousin got a job 100 miles up the road and said like, hey man, come join me up here. I got a good job. You can send money home. What would you do? And to just say like, to be honest with the fact of like, of course, 1,000 times out of 1,000, if it's about feeding my family, I'm going to go do that thing. I'm going to go and whatever. And the fact that as far as like how porous our border has been, sort of whether now it's more strictly enforced. So whatever presidency we're under, to recognize that if you had the chance to do that, you would most likely do the same thing in order to protect your family. And that would actually be the right thing to do. That's maybe kind of hard to say. Now, doing it correctly, doing it illegally and all this is not right, but the desire to protect and feed and provide for your family is one that every single human person has, and that is a fundamental universal human good. So at least to get to that point of, okay, maybe there's a little bit of common ground that a person who's maybe on the far, we would say the right of this issue, can at least say like, for the immigrants, that maybe I don't want, the illegal immigrant who's here illegally, who got here through, whatever means and is here working in this country, that I don't want to be here. At least they can begin to understand there's a reason behind it. It's not this nefarious reason. The reason that person is here is not because they're like, how do I undermine America? So I think that's maybe like a good first step in putting some flesh on this. On the other side too, for somebody who is bleeding heart, left, liberal, it says like these poor people we have to let into this country, and there's these evil conservatives on the right who are just savage and vicious, to say like, oh, actually, there's people who are recognizing that artificially inflating the numbers of laborers within our society is actually hurting the working class, is actually hurting people who are of a lower economic status who can't get jobs now because of this. So in a sense, like, oh, perhaps there are some good reasons for this. So at least to be able to kind of begin to see the interplay is huge. And then, of course, if someone is a Catholic, to say like, okay, now what does the gospel say about this? What is the Lord inviting us into? How do we begin to view this as a believer in Jesus Christ rather than as a Republican or a Democrat? That's some of those early steps that we can begin to take.
Yeah, and I also like looking at the complexity of it, also recognizing that you're looking at, this obviously has economic, that's really one of the reasons why everyone's upset about it, because it has economic money impacts. And I think that it's also important, like Jesus talked about sexuality, like what, 3-4 times in the New Testament? He talked about mammon, wealth,
money,
prosperity, wealth, prosperity, money, like 30 plus times. So there's a huge economic impact, but there's also like looking at from both sides, there's people who want to be looking at obviously more of a left-leaning kind of position, like we need to take care of the poor, we need to take our brother in need, the Good Samaritan, like these people are in need and things like that. But then you also have the opposite perspective, which is not like a lack of charity, like which is sometimes like they say, if you don't support this, like you don't have charity. It's like, no, you have persons who are sometimes on a more conservative bent who are looking at this, like what about sustainability? Like what about prudence? What about good stewardship, management of resources? Like, because the more that we take out more and more debt, the more that we're putting that debt on our children. And if you're creating a economic system and you're creating a system where everything doesn't work, and it's non-sustainable in the long term. So like it's not just a question of compassion versus that. Like he said, no, it's that you have two goods, which is compassion for the person in need versus also though, we're not called to be irresponsible in terms of creating a system which is unviable. And that's the question is like, are we creating a system which is unviable in terms of immigration? Because are we overloading the systems that we actually have? And because we also have to have the common good of the nation as itself. That's one of the reasons why borders are important, because it protects the common good of the American nation versus the common good of the Mexican versus Canadian, in our sphere.
This also brings up too, the responsibility, a lot of times we're in the American context, so we think about this in terms of our responsibility. Those principles that are put forward also mean that the countries where people are immigrating from also have a responsibility. They have responsibility to whether it's and because a lot of times there are human rights violations that are happening, or economic instability oftentimes caused by the governments of those nations. So in a sense too, it kind of becomes the pinch point kind of becomes on like where are these people eventually going to end up? And that country is the one that has to bear all this, instead of making it clear to say, like, all right, if there's people coming from different nations, what's the why behind that, and can they participate in being part of the solution as well? Because the reality is, and we kind of had the hyped up, immigrant caravan that was going through, that was coming from, I forget where it was originating from, Ecuador, from Central or South America, and was kind of coming up through Mexico, and they're coming to America, and what are they going to do? And this is under previous presidency under Biden, and it was this whole kind of like hyped up sort of, the clock is ticking on us being invaded by all these people. But the reality is they're passing through countries in order to get to the United States. And oftentimes those countries are passing them right along. They're not welcome there either, and being pushed on through. So then you get into some of the areas of what are those countries, particularly if they have majority Catholic or Christian population, at least, if not government, then they should be looking serious about, okay, what are we doing for these people as well, instead of just being like, those Americans, they can handle it, which I think is part of the frustration for people who are dealing with this on a daily basis, or when it comes to laws or enforcement.
If I can actually just point out kind of an interesting, I think it's interesting, little side historical note. When you had the movement of the barbarians during the 4th and 5th centuries.
Those are good days, man.
Good days, I remember them well. But the movement of barbarians, the movement of vast amounts of people, right, through various different regions, predominantly being pushed by the Huns. So you had all this movement from Asia being pushed, where you had all these Germans, and you had all these Franks, and you had all these people being pushed. Do you know what Constantinople's position was? Pay them to keep moving.
Interesting.
That's actually what Constantinople did. They said, go west, go over to Rome, because Constantine moved it over to Constantinople. And so that's actually what the Byzantines used to do, is that they would pay all the barbarians, all these great movements of people to move that way, because they didn't want to deal with them, which is kind of what you're talking about, like the South American, like you had these movements of people where the local leaders didn't want to take them, right? They didn't want them to impact their social systems and things like that. They also didn't want a huge influx of these varying people who were not ethnically or were not socially of their citizens. So they just paid them to keep moving on, because it was all like, just kick the ball down to the road to someone else's problem and just keep going north. So I mean, this is not something which is new. This is something which humanity has been doing for a long time, especially on a global level with countries and so forth.
So I see where in this kind of paradox of these 5 points that we started with, people have a right to immigrate under certain conditions. Also, countries have a right to keep and police their borders. And the conversation in America right now is not so much around those who have come into the country legally, who have followed through these processes, taken their time, done it well. It's around those who didn't, but they're here now. And this is where I'm curious to hear, how do we as Catholics start to process how we handle families, individuals who have come into this country illegally? Because the reality is, a lot of people have come, and there might be ways that this is overloading things within the country. There may be bad actors within that. There's also people who are moving because of a scarcity of resources or ability to live. But now with the movement with ICE in the country, we hear on both sides of the aisle within the church a lot of strong feelings and opinions. How do these 5 points come into play in our current reality with illegal immigration in America?
Well, and to make it even more complicated, if I could, because a lot of people, it's not just that they came here illegally. Oftentimes, people came legally, but are working, maybe didn't come here on a work visa, came here on a student visa, or came here on a work visa and then became students, or maybe they're overstaying their visas. So that's where it gets even more complicated. So it's not necessarily that people broke the law in coming here. It's that their status and the way that they're living here now hasn't been recognized, or they've applied for an asylum status that hasn't been granted to them yet. So there's a multitude. It's a multitude, and I'm not saying I'm not putting any judgment on anyone who works in immigration offices or people who work in immigration law, because my goodness, it is complicated and difficult. But I think it is one of those things where we as a society have been like, well, there's people who got here legally, and there's people who are legal and who are illegal. And it's like, and some people who balk at that, like, no human being is illegal. And I'm like, well, usually that's a status about whether they are legally recognized to be in this country and function here, not saying you yourself no longer exist or you're not allowed to exist. However, it's not nearly as clean cut as people who like to say, are they legal or are they illegal? It's like, a lot of times it's a lot of things. So
because you can also have a person who didn't understand the bureaucracy, and someone who didn't understand
and was let in here, was picked up by an official, and then
didn't understand the bureaucracy. I mean, you have, and also likewise, some of it is bureaucracy. So
or companies that are importing workers, have been importing workers for a long time. The worker's like, I'm getting a paycheck from this company.
Correct.
I'm getting taxes taken out for it. I've been working here with them for 10 years, and all of a sudden to be told, well, that company was doing it, but the company wasn't doing that legally. Just kind of recognizing.
One of the categories is very clean, which is, did you come here legal? Did you come here legally, and are you legal? The other category, which is not clean, which includes a whole wide spectrum of about 50 different types of things, is those who are here illegally. So, which I think your point, what you're getting
right, at. Yeah. So back to that as well. I think that the tension between the country's rights and the rights of the person to immigrate, the country's right to those two. There's always tension there. And I think recognizing that is okay, and recognizing that here in the United States, we had the Biden presidency, which seemed to kind of make as one of their benchmarks that, as the borders as open as possible. And so people coming through here without being screened, without anything else. And so in a sense, you had on the right, and you can see sort of the Trump presidency as a reaction to that, of this, running on promises of like, well, we're gonna get this thing, we're gonna shut down the border, we're gonna get these things cleaned up. So in a sense, this kind of recognizing that those are political things in order to get elected, but in the middle are people who actually came here during those times and are providing for their family and are trying to, there's probably, as you said, there's bad actors as well, but as far as no matter what, whether a million of them are great and two of them are drug dealers, or you flip those numbers around, in a sense, every single one of them is a human person. And so the enforcement now becomes, how do you now enforce what's already happened, what's already occurred? I think that's where you start to get to these philosophies then become impacting and sometimes destroying people's lives.
I think if I can also add something just to make the waters even more complex, but also a very important factor in this is the fact of why are for the jobs, because a lot of people are like, well, they're going to take our jobs, and they're taking our jobs and taking American jobs and so forth.
Take our gerbs.
Yeah, take our gerbs. But the job market, and if you're looking at the economy, there's a strong argument and a strong case to be made that because the American birth rate right now among natural Americans is about 1.6, right? That we don't actually have enough workers in the workforce to sustain our economy, because you have to have a 2.2 positive birth rate in order to sustain economically an economy. So from a Catholic position, because of the influence of artificial contraception, so people who are just like, well, I want this. I'm like, well, what about contraception? Because artificial contraception has dropped down the birth rate and the use of it throughout the American Western civilization in general. So we are currently not in a sustainable birth rate to replace the workers who are needed for the economy to work. And so if you pull out, now with Hispanic immigration, if you add Hispanics who are coming in from South America and from Mexico, and you increase and you add those numbers to it, the American birth rate right now is about 2.1, 2.2. But only with those Hispanics. So the point being is, we have created in Western civilization, in this, not just in America, we're also looking at Europe as well, because birth rates around the world have plummeted to unsustainable economic models. So and there's never been a history in the history of civilization where a society has dropped below 2.1 as recovered. So if you don't have the population,
The only time that that's happened before is during times of famine or war.
correct.
And outside of, and we're doing it outside of famine and war.
Yeah,
we're doing it because people
outside of-
selectively
yes,
deciding
outside of
not to
famine
have
and
children. And yeah, as a
So
society.
the point being is like you either have to breed, and you either have to have a sustainable population growth rate, or you import. And so like, and that's what I'm saying. So it's not just like they're coming into the country. We have created in Western civilization in America ourselves, we have created the conditions where people are needed to come in and to work. And that's where like people on the left will say like, well, who's going to pick, like it sounds really kind of racist, who's going to pick the oranges or who's going to pick the things? But it's a valid question because we've also created a situation where we actually need the workforce. And then we've opened the doors through various different administrations, more or less, especially with Biden, like open the doors to it. And now the question becomes like, we've opened the doors, or past administrations is, now we're closing the doors. But like these people moved across the borders with the expectation of work, and some of them, now yes, they might have violated the laws, but there's also the manner in which you treat them, right, post de facto. It's sort of like when you come in as a pastor as a parish, right? I inherit, like not, or pastors normally, maybe not me because I'm building my own, but like you inherit the past administrations. And you don't just have the option to basically say, well, this person screwed up everything and I'm going to fix everything. And just, you make these wide sweeping draconian laws or policy procedures, which then, you unroot. And maybe the guy behind me was terrible, right? But my decisions right now impact those people who, some in good faith, maybe some in bad faith, and maybe you have backed actors and things like that, manipulation and whatever. But you still have to make just decisions for how I can effectively promote the common good, even for people who might not be citizens, because they still have basic rights.
Yeah. I've been hearing, because that's one of the things that has been brought up is like, well, when we talk about, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness and all these sorts of right to a fair trial, that's for citizens. And it's like, well, even deeper than the United States Constitution or our Bill of Rights is our humanity. And so recognizing that has to come first. So to say like, well, since this person's not a citizen, they therefore have no rights. In the Catholic context, and I would say in the Christian context as well, that has no bearing because our humanity predates and is fundamental for any and all rights that we have as citizens of a country. Now, again, recognizing that that's then intention because you have the rights of this person versus the rights of this person, but again, I think it's one of those things that I think kind of easily gets thrown out there as like, well, that's for citizens, but for these people, they don't they don't exist, or they therefore don't have rights. Like, no. Let's step back. Human being. And so, human being has to be treated with respect. A human being has to be treated.
Well, which I would say this. I mean, I think it was Caroline Leavitt, the White House, from the White House, when she was asked a question though on the Pope Leo's recent statements on because Pope Leo had a statement. I'm trying to remember exactly what it was, but it was basically to the effect of he's like immigration in America. He's like and questioning whether or not there was abuses of human rights, and that's why Caroline Leavitt at the White House basically said, she said, I don't have a problem with Pope Leo's comments. What I do have an issue is are people's human rights being violated? If that makes sense. So like, because from the White House perspective, more recently was like, we're not violating people's basic rights. Now the question is, are basic rights, basic human rights, which is food, hydration, water, safety, and likewise the integrity of the family, are those being violated? Because from a Catholic perspective, those are things which, regardless of your nationality, regardless if you're a citizen or an alien, those are things which are inviolable.
Which comes to, and this is where, especially with the famine, because that's been kind of the thing, the first Trump administration and has continued into the conversation now as kind of the accusations from the left is, well, you're breaking up families. And in a sense, the church would say you can't within this break up families. But then from the right, it's been like, well, if somebody has broken the law, then they're arrested and therefore they're removed from their family. So that's where it starts to get complicated to say, like, do we now say that since you crossed the border with your cousin 15 years ago to get a job and have been living here for the past 15 years and you have a wife and kids and your job takes out taxes every single month and there hasn't seemed to be a problem, that all of a sudden you're picked up by ICE now, and it says, well, you broke that law 15 years ago. So therefore, you don't have like in a sense. Therefore, you don't have any rights, or therefore,
Correct.
it's all kind of taken away from you.
But then the storytelling narrative is like those persons who are doing that are put in the same category as a drug runner or a human trafficker.
Exactly.
Or the equivocation of terms where a person's like, well, you're human trafficking because you came across with that. Well, because you're using human trafficking, which everyone knows generally colloquially, like human trafficking means like human trafficking, smuggling, like smugglers, people who are actually
taking people against their
will, or people who are engaged in the sex trade and abusing minors and so forth. Like, but then you take that very common definition of human trafficking and then you apply it to a person who, even more recently, there's like, if a person goes to the church and you bring a person in your car to go and get them food, you're trafficking them.
Yeah.
Right, because you move them in your car,
and they're an illegal alien.
Yeah, and they're illegal. Yeah. So like the blurring of lines and the blurring of equivocation of terms, of how people colloquially understand something versus specifically.
Well, and this was even put forward with the breaking the law sort of thing. So what was kind of guaranteed, and this is really at the beginning of the Trump presidency, is like, okay, we're going to have strict enforcement, deportation for anyone who's broken the law here in the United States. In a sense, I think most people heard that and said, well, okay, yeah, so people who have broken the law, people who have committed murder or rape or robbed a store, or they're part of MS-13. But in a sense, to then turn around and make it like, well, when they crossed the border, they broke the law. So therefore, every single person here is now under that umbrella, like you said, to kind of lump all those things together. Therefore, you can separate them from family. Therefore, they can be held without a trial and moved to 4 different prisons in one state, which has happened to members of my parish who were never convicted of any sort of wrongdoing. We're actually here legally, but there was paperwork, clerical error. So in a sense, it's like this sense of I can hit them with this hammer because any person who didn't, who I consider didn't come here legally.
What most people understood is that people who were guilty of felonies would be deported, not people who were guilty of misdemeanors.
Yeah.
Right. Just because your tag expired and you're driving an expired tag and you get picked up and get deported over a misdemeanor, right? Then it's treated like a felony. And that's the thing, is treating people like that when you're guilty of minor infractions versus people who are guilty of major, and equating the punishment that's going to be equal for both. There is a question of, is that unjust?
Yeah.
Right.
And this comes back to, what does the church say about this? Is the dignity of the human person always has to be maintained, and that person has a right to a trial, it has a right to all those things. And if they're here, and if they've been working, therefore that work has been, the tax has been drawn out from that person. Hey, like it or not, they're our problem, and that's put in a very crass sort of way. So therefore, that we have to do everything that we can as a society, because as soon as we start selectively saying, well, this person has the right to legal representation, this person does not. It's a dangerous place to be, and that's why the church would always maintain, like, let's treat every single person as much as possible as a human being, as a person with rights. The person has a right to know what they're being accused of, to know what's actually going on, to have it clearly explained to them, to have access to the sacraments. That's one of the things that we've been seeing, where people have been locked up in ICE facilities and no one's allowed to see them. Making it so their family can't visit them, making it so priests can't get in there. So like these sorts of things, I think are where, when we demonize the whole, as a political football, we've demonized the people are the ones who are suffering because of it. The people on the right and the left are still there, and they're still arguing, they still hate each other. And people who are watching this have probably been in either one of those camps and probably been outraged when they watch their political commentator, and they're maybe mad at us right now for even talking about this, but like recognizing, like, whatever that is, if we're following Jesus, I have to get down to this place of, okay, so I'm finding Jesus right there, because Jesus says very, very clearly, however you treat, the poorest of the poor, the weakest of the weak, the least of my brothers and sisters, that's how you treat me. And so is what should keep me up at night, because Jesus nowhere in here says, I've looked, guys, I recently read the entire Bible, you should read it too. No, and nowhere is Jesus says, hey guys, at the end you'll be judged by how well you maintained your American identity. You will be judged by how well you you used immigrants as a political football to attack the rights. You'll be like any of these things. It will be said like how I treat other people. And so, man, that's a huge that should keep us up at night and say like, are my laws reflecting that? Because laws should be flowing from our sensibilities as Christians. And if not, then they need to be shifted. And obviously, they're not doing it right now.
I mean, this is a little colloquially, it might be kind of a bad, I don't know, bad example maybe, but still, like, we're all going to show up in heaven one day. We're all going to be immigrating from this earth to the next earth.
You are ticking off so many people right now by saying that.
How dare you? My point is, we are all going to be moving across one border into eternity one day. And so I'm saying, like, there's a point. Jesus, we don't know if he migrated legally with Mary and Joseph to Egypt or not. But my point is, like, I'm not just trying to throw religious barbs and things like that, because I think that there's not. But my point is, like, we hold the earth together as humanity collectively, and that is one of the principles. Is like, so there is a point where, like, recognizing, like, the earth is held in common. Like, yes, we do have common laws, we have common goods and things like that, but there has to be a balance that you don't have to choose the common good at the expense of the individual good. And you don't have to choose the individual good at the expense of the common good. And that's the Catholic position, is that you have to balance temperately, using temperance and prudence to maintain justice, our four cardinal virtues, right? And so that's why, like, these wide sweeping laws, which are arguably very intemperate, very imbalanced in the manner in which they're being applied, right? To solve a problem, to solving the problem is a real problem with illegal immigration, open borders, like that creates real problems. And so I'm not criticizing the Trump administration at all for trying to actually address and solve the problem, which no one seemingly has actually had the teeth to try to actually put it into. But the problem is, like, are you solving the problem in such a like non-temperate, non-balanced way, where you're not balancing the rights of the individual versus the rights of the nation? That's the thing. You don't have to choose one at the expense of the other. Yeah. And just making logical arguments. Well, they're not citizens, therefore they don't have rights.
Yeah. Pope Francis, in an interview, I guess last year and a half ago, was talking about this. And he talked about, like, the reality that at times governments do need to deport people. Like,
absolutely.
People, like, in a sense, and the government does have that right as well. So in a sense, so this is kind of the false equivocation that sometimes comes across when you're reading church documents on this or other stuff, to say, like, deportation equals dehumanization. And that would not be the case. And obviously anyone who's working with ICE or other stuff, to pray for those people. God bless them. That's a tough, situation to be in right now. But also encourage them, like any law enforcement or borders enforcement or anything else, that they're held to a higher standard as far as the way that they treat people. And that being coupled with, okay, so the government does have the right to do this, and at times does need to do that as well. That needs to be weighed out across with all the other goods that are here. And every administration has done that before, so that's not something new. It wasn't invented by President Trump. But this also is important to not just the American context, but worldwide as well.
Yeah, maybe circling back on something you said there, Father Time, as we close this out. Just thankful for that zoom out, Like, yeah, it might sound cliche or cheesy, like, one day we will leave this earth behind for another earth. And I think there's something happening in this conversation of, like, shifting a focus from, maybe an encampment on the right or on the left to ask seriously what the church teaches. For those of you who are watching, like, you're doing that, you're having this conversation now, and maybe it would just commend you and would pray for myself, for others. Are we being informed on these issues primarily through news media on one side of the aisle or the other? Are we consuming the Word of God in the teachings of the Catholic Church more than we're being fed by talking heads on either side of the political aisle? Because if not, we're going to have some disordering there.
Yeah.
But the integrity of those 5 points we started with, if we can come to understand those, to live with the virtues of temperance, in how we go about trying to solve these issues, I think we're going to be in a much better place. So thank you all for joining us for this conversation today. Thanks for taking the time to dig in and ask, what does the church actually teach on these issues? Thank you for sticking through a difficult conversation with us in this current climate. Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks.